Hello and welcome to Nodes 2020. I am Reshma Sheikh of the group Data Umbrella. We are a global organization and we are an inclusive community for underrepresented persons in data science, machine learning, and artificial intelligence. We organize 2 webinars a month on various topics in data science. We have a terrific library of YouTube videos. Check us out there. And we are on all social media platforms under Data Umbrella, so check us out under the social media platform of your choice. I would like to introduce our next speaker. Their title is Modeling Healthy Communication in Neo4j. Presenter's name is Matt, and Matt is a civic technologist helping support democracy by improving the relationship between constituents and governments via thoughtful technology. They have a background in conflict resolution, mindfulness, and geography, GIS, and see technology as a tool best applied in service of equity, justice, and peace building. Matt has worked as a mediator, a project manager, and developer at OpenCounter, a civic tech startup, a web developer for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and has volunteered as an advisor to local representatives' campaigns and as chair of a neighborhood association. Welcome, Matt.
Thank you so much for the introduction. Like you said, my name is Matt, and in this talk, we'll be exploring how to model human communication in graph databases, specifically with the intent of understanding and improving public discourse. So I'm really curious, what brought you to graph databases? If you pop an answer in the chat, I'd be really curious to see it. What brought me here is human relationships and studying them specifically from the perspective of conflict resolution and public discourse. My background is in civic technology. I've worked for or with all of these organizations. And in my experience, I've learned that civic tech, one of the best uses of civic technology is to improve communication between government representatives and their constituents with the ultimate aim of creating a healthy, balanced relationship with good responsive governance. I also think a lot about human communication, and one school of thought around communication involves terms like nonviolent communication, compassionate communication. There are some different traditions and ways of thinking about this, but this is just a short talk, so we'll just focus on a framework known as nonviolent communication, or NVC, which is popularized by mediator and therapist Marshall Rosenberg. The core idea of NVC is that harm and violence come from what he calls tragic expression of unmet needs, that ultimately the so-called ills of society have roots in people with core needs going unmet. NVC aims to help people identify and express their experiences, what they observe, how they feel about what they observe, what they need, and what they request of other people that would make life better, or as Rosenberg puts it, more wonderful. So an example might be, this is the formula for nonviolent communication that's often taught at sort of the beginner level. Nonviolent communication is not this formula, but this is one way to express that kind of consciousness. So the parts are, I observe, I feel, I need, I request. And an example of this, fairly convoluted, might be when I observe you taking the last slice of pie, I feel angry because I need to know that you're thinking about my desires, and I request that you check with me before eating or taking the last of something. So this is a lot clearer, a lot easier to understand than something like, I can't believe you would do that, or the much more succinct but much less clear, F you. So nonviolent communication is not only a way of talking, it's a way of listening. And there's this beautiful moment at the beginning of Parks and Recreation where Leslie Knope is talking about people yelling at her during public meetings. And she says, what I hear when I'm being yelled at is people caring loudly at me. She understands that there are underlying feelings, needs, and requests that are coming through that yelling. I can really empathize with Ms. Knope, having run a neighborhood association. I've received a lot of comments like this myself. And the one that really stands out to me is, you are the enemy of the neighborhood. Somebody came up to me at a meeting and told me that to my face. And fortunately, I knew this person a little bit. I knew their experience. And so instead of seeing this as an attack, what I heard was, I observed that when you represent a certain neighborhood consensus that I wasn't really present for, I feel concerned because I'm needing to be understood and represented, and I request that we, reconsider and redeliberate. This is a lot easier to hear. It's much clearer to understand what's going on. And so if we were to look at the structure of a nonviolent communication sentence as a graph model, it looks something like this. So the person observes an observation, feels a certain feeling, needs a certain need, and requests a certain request. But a one-to-one, using the sentence structure as the graph structure doesn't quite make sense, because we get into trouble if we want to model more than one experience per person. So if we add a second experience here, you can see that we've got two observations, two feelings, and it's not really clear. We won't be able to clearly query for which observation has inspired which feeling is related to which need. It gets kind of confusing unless we use sort of convoluted identifiers. I'm not even sure that this would work. And so there's clearly a noun or a concept or a node type missing here, and that is a person's experience. So if we add experience as a node type, then a person has an experience, and that experience involves them observing a particular observation. The experience involves them feeling that feeling, needing that need, and requesting that request. So you can see we can very fluidly add multiple experiences and be able to differentiate and say, oh, this observation inspired this feeling, and this need comes along with this request. There's really no ambiguity, or there's less ambiguity here. And so this model allows us, you might already be able to see, it allows us to explore connections. What if two people are having experiences that both inspire the same feeling or are about the same observation? We can quickly query for things like that. So let's go ahead and do that. So I've taken some public comments from a public comment board on a development project in Kendall Square in Cambridge, Massachusetts, right around the area where MIT is located. So this is a co-urbanized instance. This is a way to gather public comments on various development projects. And what we'll do now is take a look at some comments and rewrite nonviolent communication and then model them in graph data. So let's take a look at that first comment from Harry. The comment is, please don't remove the unsignalized mid-block crosswalk between Walker Memorial and the Sailing Pavilion. People are going to cross there. Make it safer for them to do so. In fact, consider making it a raised crosswalk to slow vehicles. Rail drive should not be a highway. So this is a pretty clear rewrite. There's not a lot of guesswork we really need to do to restructure this. So we can say, Harry observes the Memorial Drive plans and traffic and feels some concern. He needs safety in his community and requests a raised crosswalk. So pretty straightforward. The second comment involves a little bit more guesswork. There are a couple things maybe going on here. So Chrysius's comment is, how long until the detour from the MBTA MIT stop straight to medical, the E23 building, detour remains? I'm disabled, so the detour is one more difficulty en route to medical. It's likely that people on crutches or non-ambulatory have the same issue. So I see that Chrysius observes the detour and feels frustrated. They need to be able to plan and request information about how long the detour will last. And I also see a need for an easier commute to medical care and a request that the detour be kept as short as possible. So let's go model this data. So I'm going to switch over to my text editor. And to model this data, I'm using a markup language that I wrote called Aspen, which is designed to make it easier for you to generate graph data from semi-structured or unstructured text. There's a lot going on here. I'm not going to get into it because the focus of this talk isn't Aspen. But if you're interested, there are going to be some links at the end of the presentation, or you can get in touch with me directly. So you can see here, I've pasted in all of the rewrites from, I think it's about 13 comments. And you can see Chrysius's comments down here and Harry's up here. And then using Aspen, I've also noted that one commenter, Brendan, agrees with the positions of Harry and Ari. And I also realized that this commenter, Jan, is actually a city councilor. So I've added a relationship there. In the background, I've run the Aspen compiler, and Aspen compiles to Cypher or a few other graph data formats, but we'll copy and paste this in and switch over to the Neo4j desktop. and we'll just paste in these rewrites. And if we take a look at the whole data set, it's not particularly large. We can see a little bit of what's going on. So we already have here, Jan is a city councilor, and we can see she has a few experiences here with feeling frustrated and some concern about the plans, wanting more protections for pedestrians. If we come over here, we can see Chrysius's comments and the request about the detour being kept short and so forth. So you can see kind of the universe of data going on here. And now that we have the data modeled, we can start to ask some really interesting questions about the data, kind of from the perspective maybe of a concerned public servant or consultant on this public engagement project. What's really going on with the public discourse here? So we can use one query to ask, what are the feelings that are coming up the most often? So we'll query for the feelings and sort them by count in the data set. And we can see, concern and concerned are coming up about 7 times. Frustration is coming up quite a bit. I'm really curious about the frustration. I want to know, where is that frustration coming from? So we will find a feeling that contains the text frustration, connect it through the experience to the observation to ask, what are people the most frustrated about? And it looks here, so I think Jan was frustrated by a comment from an MIT representative, but it seems like most of the frustration is about the detour. So I want to ask, are there any other feelings that come up around the detour? And we can just do this with a simple query here. You can see we've got an anonymous relationship and an anonymous node type. We're just really connecting the feeling and the observation. We don't really need to specify these relationships. So what are the feelings that come up when the observation is the detour? And it turns out it's just frustration. Everybody's frustrated about the detour. There's not any other, feelings coming up for this. So what are people wanting to be done about the frustrations? So let's take a look at the requests that are centered around the detour. Same anonymous connections here, just connecting a request to observation where the observation is the detour. So the requests, we have 2 requesting that the detour be kept as short as possible, and 1 person, Chrysius, asking for information about how long the detour will last. And let's say, for the sake of this example, that we know that the detour can't really be rescheduled. We've kept it as short as possible already. We can certainly provide information about how long the detour will last, but because we can't necessarily meet this request, are there other needs? Or rather, what are the underlying needs that we can look at? And maybe we can meet those needs in another way other than making the detour shorter, which we can't really do. So it seems like the underlying needs are to be able to plan a shorter walk and an easier commute to medical care. So now that we understand the underlying needs, we can start to think, okay, well, can we add a medical shuttle or do anything to reroute the detour, something to generally make the situation better? So what we've done so far, just to summarize, is we have taken comments from a public discussion board, rewritten them using nonviolent communication, and modeled them using graph data. And with that graph data, we've, with very simple queries, been able to really interrogate the data set and get an understanding of the public discourse. And one kind of big takeaway is what we've done is we've combined graph data, interconnected data, with a way of thinking about human communication. And the combination of those has really transformed how we can understand this public discourse. And if we're a public servant or a consultant, can maybe do something to improve it. But let's add a little bit of nuance to the discussion. A couple things to keep in mind. The first is this is not representative, it's a sampling. So these are just comments that are coming in off a discussion board. But if you're in a civic context, there's a lot of people who either don't have the time to make it into a public meeting, or maybe don't have the digital access to be able to communicate what they're needing and feeling. So this is one way, perhaps a very useful way of looking at what's going on in the public discourse, but it's just a sample. It's not fully representative and not necessarily kind of the sole source of truth. It's also a very subjective best attempt. So when we were rewriting, we're kind of inferring what somebody might restate their comment in nonviolent communication might look like. And while we can probably do some pretty reliably good guesswork, this is not objective truth. It would be much better to receive this specifically from the people involved. So there's definitely a filter. In this case, me doing this data entry is filtering through my assumptions and my experiences. So that's to be kept in mind. This isn't really pure truth, but it is probably a pretty good representation for this project. And lastly, this is not a complete understanding, but it's one useful lens. So when I was rehearsing this, I was talking with an urban planner, and she commented that this approach kind of takes the humanity out of the public comment process. And that has both an upside and a downside. The upside is that it's typically the loudest voices in the room, the loudest complaints that get all the attention, even if that shouldn't be what's driving public discourse or policy discussions. It does provide a broader lens, but it also kind of misses some of the nuance or some of the interplay that can come from public discourse. So this shouldn't be used on its own, but perhaps could be one tool in a toolbox. So thank you so much for being part of this talk. I want to let you know that I am available for hire, either as a software developer, organizational consultant, or a little bit of both. You can see that on my website, mattcloyd.com. If you're interested in learning more about the Aspen language, I've got a talk that was recorded on October 19th, webinar with Neo4j. But you can also get to the links through my Linktree. It's just Linktree/Matt Cloyd. I've got information about Aspen and nonviolent communication and a couple other topics that sort of inform the philosophy behind this approach. And also feel free to get in touch, questions, comments, or you just want to nerd out about something. I love meeting new people. So feel free to just email me directly. I'm at cloyd.matt@gmail.com. So thanks again. Thank you so much for being part of this, and happy graphing.